What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court for today. I am Sean Murphy, and today we got a lot to talk about. Pretty packed episode on the docket for today. We're going to be talking about the big win in Charlotte, I should say, over the Charlotte Hornets and the brawl in the Buzz City between the Pistons in Charlotte. We're definitely going to be talking about a lot of that and all the different potential consequences that can come from the event, but also want to talk a little bit and give some respect to Paul Reed and everything that he's been doing, and talk a little bit about Duncan Robinson as well. Maybe if we have some free time towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about All-Star Weekend and all of that good stuff. But we got to start with everything that happened in Charlotte last night. What was supposed to be a showcase of, two of the best up and coming young teams in the league turned into an absolute nightmare for the league right before All-Star break, just because you had these two young, fiery teams going at it. And it was one of those things where, as a fan, you can't help but, be on the edge of your seat and, just be enthralled by everything that went on. But right as things start to calm down, you just start going, oh boy, this could be pretty bad when it comes to consequences. And I want to start the conversation specifically with the fact that I can't come up here and possibly blame Isaiah Stewart for what he did during that game. I think Isaiah Stewart is one of the most misrepresented and misunderstood players in the entirety of the NBA. He's someone who's known for, obviously the incident against the Lakers a couple years ago. And now, for people that don't tune into Pistons games, this is probably the first time they've seen him since. But all of us who watch Pistons games regularly know that he's far more than that as a player, and is someone who is an amazing defensive talent, someone who's grown a lot on the offensive side of the court. But in this case, Miles Bridges threw a sucker punch. First time I've ever seen him swing on a man, but he threw a sucker punch at Jalen Duren, and Isaiah Stewart responded accordingly. So with that, if don't take my word for it. JB Bickerstaff was asked about Isaiah Stewart stepping in, and was asked, pretty much was almost kind of set up to criticize Stu, but was there to the defense. So with that, here's JB Bickerstaff on what Isaiah Stewart did and why he found it to be understandable.
You see it one way, I see it another way. Obviously, again, I repeat, we don't want to see it get to that point. But when you go back and watch the film, they ran multiple guys at JD. JD and Stu consider themselves to be brothers. And if you run two guys at one guy and, you've already crossed the line, human instinct tells him to protect his little brother. Again, I hate to see it again, but that's the nature of what happened. So, I hate it for Stu because of the things that are going to follow. But again, we weren't the ones that crossed the line tonight and initiated this.
And so the key thing that JB said in there was, I feel for Stu because of what's going to come from this. And that's the reality of the situation. Is as much as we here, can come on and talk about who we think's in the right, who we thought was fair to do what, there's that that subjective opinion side, and then there's the harsh reality of how the NBA operates. And the NHL, if this fight happened, it'd be a 5-minute power play brought to you by Quiznos. Here in the NBA, it's a little different. Specifically, I think we're going to see for Isaiah Stewart potentially up to a double-digit game suspension here. Specifically, he's already faced a 5-game suspension for a similar incident, in the league's eyes. Again, this isn't my viewpoint here. This is just telling you what I think is going to happen. I think the league office, because they always come down harder on what they view as repeat offenders. And so someone like Isaiah Stewart, there's a very realistic chance could face a double-digit game suspension here. Now, personally, I think, something like a 5 or 6 game suspension would be pretty reasonable. But I wouldn't be surprised. And even, someone like Bobby Marks, who's a front office expert, worked in a capacity of basketball for a super long time. He went on ESPN today and he said he expects Isaiah Stewart to get 10 games. So let's say that happens, right? Let's say the doom scenario, Isaiah Stewart gets 10 games. More than likely, I would expect Jalen Duren to get somewhere around 2 or 3 games. Here is the next 10 games in the Pistons schedule, okay? At Toronto. And then when they're back from the All-Star break, at the Knicks. At the Bulls, it's a little bit lighter. But then it's versus the Spurs, versus the Thunder, versus the Cavs, at the Magic, at the Cavs, at the Spurs. And then they finish with the Nets there at the end. And so I'm not saying they're going to lose each and every one of these games. But what I am saying is to lose one of your best players, the heart and soul of your team, your defensive anchor, potentially for 10 games when you have a 5.5 game lead on the East, that hurts. And again, I think with the way that they've played and the quality of play we've seen all season long, I don't expect Detroit to necessarily fully take a step back. But if you're losing key players and key cogs in the wheel for that significant amount of time, it'd be foolish to not talk about the possible implications that this can have on the rest of the season, because we're talking about home court advantage here. We're talking about the difference of playing in front of a ruckus crowd in Little Caesars Arena versus being the away team in the Madison Square Garden. That's a pretty big difference. And sure, it's ultimately going to come down to execution. This is a team that's played really well on the road or at home. They have a style of basketball that travels, but we all know players are instinctively more comfortable at home. They play better at home, especially when the stakes are higher. And so, especially when we're talking about the Pistons clinching home court advantage in the playoffs, throughout the playoffs for the first time in 20 years, that's pretty significant. But then for Isaiah Stewart, and I think this is also just a really unfortunate aspect of this as well, assuming he does face this suspension, this more than likely puts him out of the all defensive race, meaning that the excellent campaign that Isaiah Stewart is having isn't going to be recognized at the level that it deserves, which could also have financial implications in what he could potentially earn in future contracts. So again, in the grand scheme of things, I don't expect this to derail the season. I'm not saying that it's time to start hitting the panic button, but this is something to monitor now, especially when you're talking about perhaps one of the toughest 10-game stretches that the Pistons have in their entire season. They'll probably be without one of their best players. Undeniably, that stings. And I tweeted this after the game too. Man, thank goodness Ron Holland wasn't there. Because the last thing that the Pistons needed in that situation was another member of the dog pound to hop into the crossfire and see some potential things go down. Especially someone as unpredictable as Ron Holland. We've seen he is willing to swing. And so that would have been fascinating to say the least. Another thing that was fascinating, by the way, in Miles Bridges, he touched on, Jalen Duren, what he did with Moussa Diabate's face. And he said, putting his hand on Moussa Diabate's face is the most disrespectful thing you can do. I'm just going to let that simmer for a minute. Miles Bridges is lecturing someone on how disrespectful it is to put your hands on someone's face. Anyone see the irony in that? Anyway, that's a conversation for a different day, for a different podcast. Another thing we did learn, though, in this game and just throughout the last month, we've talked about it here on the pod too, Charlotte's looking legit. And as much focus as there is and as many followers on Instagram as there are for, the likes of LaMelo Ball, this is the Brandon Miller Con Kneppel show. And I quite frankly, I heard this brought up other places as well. I actually heard this on the Athletic NBA Daily Show, and it's like, when is the last time you've seen a rookie shooting threes at that magnitude and expecting him to make them just about every time? Because that's about where I was at with Cunningham last night, especially down the stretch of that game. If he was left wide open, it's like a face palm moment. It's like, oh no. And then you pair that with Brandon Miller, who's coming into his own physically, who's becoming a much better isolation scorer, someone who can put the ball on the court, who could space the floor as well, by the way. He's a really good shooter too. It's almost like if Paul George was like even longer and even taller. So that's kind of terrifying. And then, oh yeah, you have Charles Lee and a phenomenal coaching staff in a front office that seems to have a coherent vision. And as much as a guy like Moussa Diabate might have lost his cool, and this was probably the worst game, that he's played as a pro, having to go up against Jalen Duren and some of the physical bigs that were there. It was definitely a rough outing for him, but he's been solid too. And now, I mean, like this Hornets team, we've talked about it for a long time. They've been able to score the basketball. That's never been an issue for this Hornets team. Especially you bring in someone like Cunningham too. It's like, all right, yeah, this team's gonna be able to score points. Breaking news. But can you defend? And they're getting a lot better at that. Now, in the event that the Pistons and the Hornets were to face off in some playoff series, if that was to be the round one matchup for Detroit, first of all, if that is the round one matchup for the Pistons, then because wow, is that a difficult matchup to face at the very beginning of the postseason. But on top of that, I do think ultimately the Pistons would have to be heavily favored because of the physicality, because of the experience. I do think as much as Charlotte's been able to start to bring that more, that's just still not instinctively the way that they prefer to play the game. They do kind of live and die a little bit more by the 3-point shot than the Pistons do, but at the same time, they're living and thriving off of it right now, especially the way that they're shooting. And I mean, just to put in perspective, just how differently these teams play. I mean, in this game, Charlotte was 19 of 47 from three. 19 of 47. So obviously Charles Lee brought, the heavy 3-point shooting offense from Boston. And then for Detroit, 5 of 25. Not great. Not ideal. Not exactly what you want to see. However, yet again, despite a rough shooting night, they pull it out, and they do it because of the defense that they play. But they also did it because of a man that we like to call Basketball Paul. B-ball Paul, Paul Reed. When I tell you that I can't think of a more valuable third big in the history of the Pistons, let alone perhaps in this modern NBA, I legitimately mean it, because he came into this situation having to stay ready, not knowing that he was going to be the only big active for the rest of the game. And he came in and scored 12 points, had 2 steals. He had 1 block. He had that full court QB pass to Duncan Robinson, essentially running the vert. And his play was just sensational. The fact that he was able to come in and maintain, and if anything, as Greg Kelser said, elevate the level of big play that Detroit was getting, just speaks to everything Paul Reed's done. And I went through, I just kind of looked at B-ball reference, and I was like looking at all the different games and trying to remember, like, just here. And I racked up, here are all the games I wrote down that Paul Reed had a legitimate, massive impact in Detroit winning this year. So I have at Houston, which was the second game of the season. Not sure if you remember, but that was the other game that Jalen Duren got ejected from. Versus Chicago at home. I believe Duren was actually suspended for that one. If not, he was injured, and essentially he was the only big available that night. Then versus Philly, started that one as well. Played really well there. At Miami, against the Bulls again at home. Versus the Knicks on Friday, where he came in and played awesome throughout that game too, when Jalen Duren was out. And then the game versus the Hornets. And the fact that you're getting that from your third string big, someone who on half of the teams in the league probably would be their second string big at the very least. But I can think of 5 teams right now, or I can look at 5 teams throughout the league and go, why wouldn't they want Paul Reed starting over whoever's starting for them? And the fact that you're getting that level of professionalism, that level of preparedness, someone who, throughout the season, where there's a lot of nights where Paul gets DMPs, he doesn't play every single game. He's only appeared in 37 of the games this year. So there's been like 14, 15 games that he didn't even play a second. And then there's nights where he's starting and is one of the focal points of the offense and one of the anchors of the defense. And no matter what, he's ready. I don't think I've ever had a game that I've watched Paul Reed play in and go, you know what? They could have used more from Paul Reed when it comes to effort tonight. Or Paul Reed just didn't seem prepared in this game. That's never the case. And the fact that you can say that about a third string big, for one, it says everything about his professionalism, the way that he prepares, the way that he goes about his job, the way that he comes into the office, so to speak, every single day. But then on top of that, it speaks to the coaching, it speaks to the culture, it speaks to everything that the Pistons, all the buzzwords that they throw out. It's like, okay, cool, but like, what does that actually mean? That's what that means. Like, that is the living embodiment of it. The fact that you can have someone play just about every single night, or not every single night, just about once a week sometimes, and play to that level. I mean, that's culture right there. Speaking of culture, a guy who came in and has embodied the Pistons culture, came from Heat culture, Duncan Robinson. I think it's just time to say, I think he's been the perfect Malik Beasley replacement. Obviously, we weren't going to get that level of volume from anyone when you talk about the high volume 3-point shooting that you got from Malik. I mean, that was like a historic season. It was going to be hard for Malik to replicate that if he was back in the lineup. But since December 1st, he's averaging 12 points a game. He's 40% from 3 on 7 threes a game. You look at his season stats now versus throughout the rest of his career, and it's remarkably consistent. And you look at the efficiency numbers per B-ball index, he's in the 95th percentile in 3-point shot making efficiency. He's the 95th percentile of off-ball gravity, and he's in the 95th percentile in catch and shoot 3-point shot making efficiency. So he's someone who's just elite when it comes to catch and shoot threes. He's someone who causes a lot of confusion and causes a lot of concern from defenses, and allows guys to get more open towards the paint. Is someone, if you try to run him off the 3-point line, he is able to drive to the basket. He's a better passer than people give him credit for. He certainly can be hunted a lot on the defensive side of the ball, but I think to Duncan's credit, one thing that's really solid about the way that he plays is it's definitely never effort. It's definitely never positioning. He always plays with a high level of intensity. And I think something that gives him a little bit of an edge over, say, a Malik when it comes to the defensive side of the ball is the length that he brings to the lineup. I mean, his wingspan is insane. I mean, he looks like, I know he looks like Sheen from Jimmy Neutron, but he looks like if Sheen from Jimmy Neutron had a 10-foot wingspan. It's insane. So the fact that he's been able to do what he's done is just been really impressive, and it's just been a seamless fit thus far. And I think I'm just curious to see when it comes to Duncan and just the way that he continues to play, and the level of production that we've seen from him. I'm curious to see how it looks, with more of these lineups, specifically if they play him and Kevin Huerter alongside each other, the potential spacing that can open up. But also, I think something that, is really beneficial if you do try to play that lineup is you're not necessarily you're not getting the defensive production that if you were to get, if like both Ron and Asar were on the court, but you are going to get, decent defense, and you're going to get more spacing. So I'm not saying that's something they're going to run out there every single night, or that's something that's going to replace the 9-to-5 effect, because those guys have been historically dominant. But it's like the fact that it's an option that they can turn to, and it's something that, it's a switch that they can flip if they would like. It's just a luxury to have. So again, it'll be interesting to see how, someone like Kevin Huerter continues to get worked into the rotation, how he's going to continue to play. But for now, what we've seen thus far, again, just Duncan's been a great addition. Karis LeVert, But Kevin Huerter, I'm interested to see how that continues to go. In all seriousness, too, Karras has some plays where he can produce, and he had a couple of big steals defensively. There were some points where he was pretty productive last night. So I can't say the Karras LeVert experience is all that bad. But things I'm seeing on here, people are asking how long I think the suspensions are going to be. And kind of just rounding back to that, I do think when we talk about the length of the suspensions, I mentioned earlier, I think Isaiah Stewart more than likely is going to be a double-digit, suspension. I do think it's probably going to be 10 plus games. But then at the same time, I think for like a guy like Jalen Duren, I wouldn't be surprised it was 2 to 4 there either, just because of the fact that, he's someone where it's not that he's like a repeat offender necessarily, but he's certainly, has been chippy in the past. He's gotten ejected before. And again, I wonder from the league's perspective if they view him as the initiator just because of the head push and all of those different things. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that. I know before we go, a couple things I wanted to touch on. So All-Star weekend coming up. I can't possibly care. And I saw that a thing that's just interesting to me, and I think it just kind of just speaks to the continual losing of the plot of where we're at, is I think I saw the NBA announce that they invited over 200 different influencers to the All-Star game. And from what I can gather, I don't think they just went and got like NBA influencers. I don't think they went and invited like podcasters. Like I think they went and invited like Gen Z streamers or people who aren't necessarily connected to the game of basketball. And I think you're going to see a lot of, for lack of better terms, I think you see a lot of clip and engagement farming. I think you're going to see, a lot of stuff where players, are kind of in the middle of these bits. And I think the NBA is going to realize they didn't fully know what they're signing themselves up for. But on top of that, it just brings me back to, who is this for? And I think that's like a fundamental question I keep coming back to with the All-Star game, because like, if it's for the fans, I think we can all agree they're failing in that element. I mean, when you talk about being able to get into the game itself, mostly, the tickets are obscenely expensive, but a lot of them are reserved for major sponsorships or partnerships. And then on the other hand, you're like, okay, well, if it's for these brand deals, if it's for these sponsors, if it's for all these marketing opportunities, based on the product you're getting, is this really getting the returns that these companies are hoping for? Like, are these companies that are endorsing like the slam dunk contest or the 3-point contest or the rising star challenge, like based on everyone talking about these guys not even trying and the product not being quality and people saying, oh, I don't even care, not even going to bother tuning in, like, are they even getting what they're looking to get out of it? And so I see reports that come across like that, and it's like, it's not like oh, they should have invited me, but they should have invited people like me. They should have invited the likes of the basketball content sphere, people who actually want to cover the game or highlight the beauty of basketball. But instead, I think you're just going to, out of the All-Star game this year, I think it's just going to be a lot of trash. And as excited as I am for JB and the entire Pistons coaching staff and, Cade and Duren to be a part of it, and as much as I think they're going to relish in the opportunity, and who knows, we could potentially get a decently competitive game for a change, which would be great. I don't think it's going to be because of the format. I don't think it's going to be a great weekend because of the influencers that they brought in. And we talk, for what's made the All-Star game so great is the level of competition that we've gotten, or, the amount that players would pour into these contests and would really try to market and, kind of externally push the game of basketball. But that's not exactly what it is now. And even then, do they necessarily need to make that same push? Because with the latest media deal that they've gotten, with the fact that the NBA is likely going to be in Europe, with their own league here in the next couple of years, like what is this for now? And I think until they answer the question of like, all right, well, why? Then I think we're just going to continue to keep getting duds, which it stinks because I want to be able to pull up, who's going to be in a dunk competition to be excited about it. I mean, obviously there was going to be Jalen Duren before, the knee soreness popped up, but it's not the case now. So with that, would love to hear your thoughts and everything that happened in the Hornets game and how you think this, potential extended leave from Isaiah Stewart and, who knows how long they'll be without Jalen Duren, how that could affect the team. And is this something that you now are keeping an eye on? And do you want to see a Hornets Pistons playoff series? Let me know in the comments down below. That is going to do it for today's episode, though. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you subscribe.